This can play Wind Waker and it's under $100. I don't even know why you're watching this, just go buy it. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Joey's Retro Handhelds. I'm Joey, and today we're going to be doing a deep dive review of the Retroid Pocket 2S. Let's start this video off strong with a look back at what I said about the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. I can't and won't recommend the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus Metal Edition to anybody. And I don't know if I would even go for the plastic version at this point, given that a lot of my issues were on the button placements and just the confusing layout of it. So credit where credit's due, the Retroid Pocket 2S has basically solved all of the issues and concerns that I had with the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. Getting that out of the way to prove that I'm not in Retroid's pocket. But I love this device. It is a fantastic device and it's an easy recommendation for almost anybody that I can think of. This device was not sent for review. Retroid doesn't really do review units in that way. This is going to be a weird review for me to do, because I don't want this to come off as a commercial or some sort of a marketing video. I'm a reviewer, it's not my job to sell devices. It's my job to help inform consumers on what they can spend their money on and if the product is worth it. There's enough of the other type already out there. But honestly, the Retroid Pocket 2S is the peak of what this hobby is. It is a fantastic retro gaming handheld in every way, shape, or form. They've done an outstanding job with this device, and I've been extremely happy with it. And it's an easy device to make a video about because it's just awesome. This device should be seen as the gold standard going forward for any new devices coming out, and should be the comparison point for everybody. If you've been hovering on the sidelines waiting to jump in with the right device for you, this is it. If you've been waiting for a device that can do Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast for under $100, as well as some GameCube, Wii, and those other consoles, this is it. My review is a bit later than everybody else's, but let's just dive in. The Pocket 2S has a bunch of fun colors out there. I have the green here with the Skittle buttons, and it's a transparent green. In person, it looks a lot nicer than it does on photos and probably this video. The green is a weird one. It changes depending on how you're looking at it. But you can also buy the colored buttons separately if you want to go with some of the other lesser colors, like the 16-bit, black, retro, indigo, and the other options they have. There's also going to be a gunmetal metal variant that's coming out as well, and maybe a blue one, although it's not confirmed. So there's going to be options there too. But if you've seen my video on the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus Metal Edition, you know that me and Retroid's metal versions don't get along nicely. There's two variants to this device. There's a $99 US 3 gig, 32 gig internal storage model, and then there's the 119 4 gig, 128 gig internal storage model. The RAM and the storage are the only two differences between both of those. The model that I have here is the 4 GB RAM and 128 GB internal storage option. As far as performance goes, I don't have a way to test this on my end as I only have the one device, but the difference between 3 gigs of RAM and 4 gigs of RAM likely won't be anything that would affect anything on the Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast and under. You might see that become an issue for GameCube, Wii, Switch, PSP, 3DS, and all of those sorts of consoles. Actually, PSP would probably be fine, but you get what I mean. It might be an issue for some of the higher end consoles. Let's talk about the specs as we look at the device. We have the 3.5 480p screen here, which also supports HDMI out through the mini HDMI port at the top. I think the smaller screen is the one hiccup for a lot of people for this device. And I have to say, on my end, I stopped noticing it pretty quickly. It's not something that you really focus on or that bothers you while you're actually playing games, but it is something that you notice right out of the box. I'm surrounded by devices at this point, and even the device that this is competing with for me is the Anbernic RG405M, which has a 4-inch screen. But even for me, I can't really tell the difference in a way that bothers me. It's something that I'm just used to at this point, especially since I'm actually using other devices that have smaller screens as well. But on top of it being a smaller screen, it's actually a nice screen as well. So it's not like they just cut corners here. This is a really nice screen to use and play on. Behind the screen, we're using Android 11, and this is Retroid's custom Android build. Retroid has done a lot to help with onboarding when it comes to Android, and you can see it through the setup process with you being able to choose from a whole bunch of different emulators that are pre-installed or can be pre-installed on the device. If you want to just have a clean slate, you can choose none of them, and that's the way that I usually do it. It's a bit of a double-edged sword here because a lot of the options that they include as a pre-install option are out of date and older and just not that good. But if you have the time and energy, you can go and set up everything yourself. I think for somebody new to this device, new to Android, new to the hobby, there's a really good option here of just going with what Retroid suggests. But for everybody else, you might want to pull up a guide like I've made and just go through and customize it to the way that you want and with the best settings, because you're just going to get a better performance out of it. One small tip, if you're going to be using Daijisho, is to go into the Android settings, handheld settings, input, and then you want to change the L2 and R2 mode to both. And the way that that works is it'll allow you to now use the triggers in Daijisho to switch between tabs, where out of the box it doesn't allow that. Behind the screen, the chip running all of this is the Unisoc T610 chip. And it's very similar to the T618 chip that we've seen in other devices like the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus or the RG405M. So we know what this device can do, and you'll see it today, but you're going to get pretty much perfect compatibility for Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast, and you can also play some of the libraries of GameCube, Wii, PlayStation 2, 3DS, Switch, and all of that. Despite my introduction, and despite what you're going to see today, don't buy this device for those systems. If you're looking at this device, you're looking at it for Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, and everything under that. I wouldn't grab this device if you're looking for GameCube, Wii, PlayStation 2, and all of those sorts of systems. They're just bonuses and treat them as such. The controls on this device are fantastic, and it starts with the D-pad. It's the same D-pad that was used on the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, and it's one of my favorite things about this device. Let's see how it does with the Pokemon test. The idea here is that we don't want the character to move in any other direction than the one that we're pushing down on. And that means that it'll avoid false diagonals. This device here passes with flying colors, as it did on the 3 Plus. The D-pad is honestly just a joy to use. It's loose, it has a lot of travel, and it just feels great. There's nice colorful buttons here that are larger than the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, and are the same as the ones on the Retroid Pocket Flip. The only way these could be better is if they were a bit bigger, like you would find on the RG405M, but the shell doesn't allow for it on the 2S. But I'm a big fan of these, and there's nothing to complain about, they just feel good. Continuing on with that greatness, and thank you Retroid, we have full analog sticks here, and we're not using switch sticks for once. These are also Hall effect sticks, so there's no drift to be expected on this device. The sticks here are the absolute standout of this device. I can't actually capture in words just how good these sticks are. These are some of the best analog sticks that I've used on any device, and very much reminds me of a smaller version of the Asus ROG Ally sticks. And I love those ones as well. If these don't become the standard on every handheld device going forward, I'm going to be extremely disappointed, because honestly, I want these on everything now. They're concave, nice motion, I have nothing bad to say about these sticks. We have front-firing speakers, which is just an awesome addition, and haven't been getting in the way at all. Audio sounds just great, and we can have a quick listen right here. Continuing on, these might be the best speakers that I've seen in a device under $100, and they punch way above their weight class here. They could compete with some of the higher end devices with speakers. We have the home, back, and programmable buttons at the bottom, as well as the start and select at the top. I use the home button and back button quite a bit, as it's easy to just get back to Daijiisho or to just get out of a menu or something along those lines. I actually haven't programmed the programmable button at all, and I haven't really found a use for it yet, but I'm sure I'll figure out something. It's a bit of a nitpick, but I really do wish these buttons stuck out just a little bit more, and same with the other buttons of start and select. Sometimes it's just a bit hard to accurately push down these buttons, and it takes more force than I'd want to use on a start and select. It's a bit of a minor annoyance. Lastly, there's a 4000 milliamp battery in here that has translated to about 5 to 6 hours of game time, which has been more than fine for my uses. It's not going to get anywhere near what the RG405M is doing with Gamma OS, but for as often as you use this device, it's been more than enough. And this is all with the balanced power profile, which I'll be using throughout the entire video, and for me personally, just going forward. I don't see a reason to use any of the higher power profiles for me personally. Now, looking at the top of the device, and we have the analog shoulder buttons, which should make a lot of people really happy. If you don't know what that means, the easiest comparison to draw from is a racing game, where how far you hold down the trigger is how fast you go, where non-analog triggers, like something on the Nintendo Switch, only have two modes, gas and no gas. Needless to say, it's an awesome addition, and it wasn't something they actually had to do, especially for a device like this. You're likely not going to see a lot of use out of it. It'll mostly just be for Dreamcast as well as GameCube. But it's a welcome upgrade that has no downside, and that's my favorite kind of upgrade. Power button, volume buttons, USB port for charging, and the mini HDMI port are all up here as well. And then on the bottom, we have the SD card slot as well as a 3.5mm audio jack. Just a quick note on the SD card slot, since I know a lot of people are having trouble with it. You want to use the little flap, and that'll help you actually get the SD card out, because you can use it to just push down on it from an angle. Putting the SD card back in is a bit more of a challenge, and I have to kind of use my nails in a weird angle to just get it to go in there. On the back, we have nothing but screws, and I wish that Retroid would use grip pads on the back, like we see on the 405M and 353PS and other devices. But this is a nitpick. I don't find the device to be slippery at all, it's just something that would help a little bit more. Let's do some size comparisons with some other devices so you can see how this might fit in and how it compares to them. The main device that I want to compare this with is the Anbernic RG405M, as for me, it's directly competing with it for my daily device. They may as well just be the exact same size, with the Retroid being a bit thicker on the back due to the triggers. But the 405M is a bit heavier due to the metal. The 405M has slightly larger face buttons, and the home and start and select buttons feel a lot better to me. Then there's obviously the larger screen as well. But the 2S is better in every other way. The D-pad, the sticks, the speakers on the front, it's a lot better in a lot of the other ways that matter. I have to be honest, at an almost $70 difference between the two on the lowest SKU, it's going to be hard for me to continue recommending the RG405M over the 2S, but we'll talk more about this later. Next up is the Anbernic RG353PS, which is also another device that I'm in love with, and I use quite a bit. The PS is a bit bigger, has larger face buttons, and better start and select buttons for me. But again, the 2S is just better in every other way. It's a very nice upgrade and smaller, but not as ergonomic. The PS to me is the most comfortable retro handheld out there. One takeaway for the 2S from both these other devices is to maybe add curved edges on the sides. That'll help a lot with ergonomics for any future devices. For a quick size comparison, it's basically the exact same size as the Nintendo New 3DS, if that helps you visualize it at home with a device that most likely a lot of people have. Or if you're in the Retroid family, it's slightly wider than the Retroid Pocket Flip and thinner than the Flip. All of this to say that this is perfectly pocketable and portable, and that's exactly what you want out of a device like this. Before we get into the showcase, I want to talk about two issues that I noticed with my device that you should definitely be aware of. The first is it's showing signs of the screen not being properly attached, or possibly falling out in the future. This doesn't seem to be limited to my device only. I've been seeing it across the Discord as well as Reddit. But it also doesn't seem to be extremely widespread either. None of my other devices, out of all the devices that I own, do this. It's just this single one. I don't know how I seem to get lucky with defective devices all the time, but I'm starting to feel a little bit special. The second issue is heat. If you're planning on playing any platform above Nintendo 64 or Dreamcast on this device, which again, it's not a great time for the most part, the device gets significantly hot depending on the game. The screen itself gets really hot to the touch, as well as the handholds on the back, where it's a bit more warm than I'd like it to be. I was able to clock the CPU at a high heat of 74 degrees in Twilight Princess, and this was using Retroid's built-in monitor. That temperature isn't inherently high by itself, but when you combine it with the rest of the device and the heat that it's emitting, it's a big issue. Something to keep an eye on if you're someone that's going to be pushing this device to its limits by using maybe the extreme profile and going GameCube or anything like that, the heat might be a concern for you. Again, in my testing, I was only in balanced mode, so I can only imagine what would happen if I were to change that. Let's take a look at some games. Like all of my other reviews I've done on devices with the T618 chip, which is a slightly more powerful version of the one we have today, we basically know what the performance is for this device as we discussed earlier. I was considering skipping a game showcase for the older consoles that we know run perfectly, but I thought it would be a good idea just to show what sort of a difference you might see between the usual 4-inch screen that's on most devices like the 405M and the 3.5-inch screen that the 2S uses. Let's start off with Super Mario Land on the Game Boy, and we're using the native aspect ratio here. The 405M is using the boosted color option in display settings, and the 2S is using the increased contrast settings. Both look great. The screen on the 2S is a bit more pleasing to my eyes, and also you can see that the screen difference is pretty big here. But there's something about the 2S's screen that makes me not mind it at all. Looking at Advance Wars for the Game Boy Advance, and you can still see the 405M has slightly darker tones. But again, both look great. I've been using my Anbernic RG351P for Game Boy Advance games, so I'm used to the 3.5-inch screen on the 2S. PlayStation is a console that I'll be using this device for, and let's just boot up Final Fantasy IX. Of course, this won't have any issues running it. And I also like to turn on PGXP settings in DuckStation, which smooths out the textures so they're not as pixelated or as blocky. It's not for everyone, but we have enough power here to do it and not have any concern, which is what you want. Let's fast forward to the two consoles that I'd buy this device for, and that's Nintendo 64 and Sega Dreamcast. For a long time now, people have been incorrectly stating that devices under $100 could do these platforms, and it was never the case. No other device under this price can do those systems out of the box without heavy tweaks, and even then, it's not like this. So if you're after a device that can do those, and hold you over until we get perfect compatibility for GameCube, PlayStation 2, Wii, and the rest, this is exactly what you're looking for. I'm going to be using some different games here as I feel like my game choice has gotten a bit stale in some other videos. We're using the M64 Plus FZ emulator straight off the Play Store, and we're having some fun with Toy Story 2. I've changed no settings. All I did was add input mapping so we could map controls and booted up the game. We're running at full speed and we're playing great. Jumping into Bomberman 64, and it's more of the same. Aside from some games needing different input mapping depending on how the C buttons work in that game, Nintendo 64 is just perfect here. And just to prove this and to be fair to all of my other device reviews, let's check out Mario Tennis, which is my benchmark for Nintendo 64. We have to actually change the emulation profile to Glide and 64 Accurate here to avoid the box glitch that happens, and I zoomed in the screen to 108%. As expected, Mario Tennis runs perfectly well. And just gonna sound like a broken record here, but it confirms that this device is perfect for this system. Nintendo 64 on here is just a dream. Let's jump into the Dreamcast side of things, and we'll start off with Rayman 2. It's a game that I haven't really shown before, and it'll give you an idea of how Dreamcast looks. Another example would be Jet Grind Radio. And I know I've mentioned it before, but Dreamcast just isn't a system that I grew up with. So my knowledge of the library is basically limited to Sonic, Skies of Arcadia Legends, and Soul Calibur. Trying to show off some of the other games here, but the main idea is Dreamcast just runs great. Buy this device for both of these systems. Besides the Nintendo DS, which comes with its own dual screen weirdness and runs great on this device, the PlayStation Portable is the only other platform that plays well on this device. But of course, it comes with its own set of issues due to the aspect ratio and text size in games. I don't personally think this is a good way to play PSP games, despite the fact that they actually run well. Taking a quick look at Final Fantasy Tactics, and you can see why. The text is small and hard to read, and unless you're a monster that stretches the display, it's not the best experience. But if you can get around that, PSP games will run great. Now let's jump into the bonus consoles, and we'll start off with Wind Waker on the GameCube. And we're going to be using Dolphin Official Development Build here, and the PAL version of the ROM. I think I've said it a few times now, but just remember that from here onwards, we're looking at bonus platforms. I'll include a link in the description to a community spreadsheet that people are using to track performance for these different consoles and for all these different games. You'll likely be referring back to it quite often to find settings and other tweaks to get games running. Most won't just run out of the box. But I just happen to be showing the ones that kind of do. Animal Crossing plays fantastic here. It's a fun game and you can actually play it at full speed. You might even be able to get away with using the NTSC ROM instead, but I didn't really check that out. For these platforms, they go beyond what I would use this device for, especially if you're someone new to the hobby or if this is your first device. For an easy pick up and play time, stick to everything before this. Nintendo Wii is a lot more of the same. And we're using Rayman Origins here, and I can tell that it's running just a little bit slower than it should be, despite the fact that it's showing a full frame rate. So we likely need a few tweaks just to get this running perfectly. Looking at Smash Bros. Brawl, and generally if it's a 1 versus 1 stage with not a lot happening, the game will run pretty good. But in a scenario with 4 characters on screen, it's not a super great experience, especially when you start to get zoomed out on a 3.5-inch screen. I could spend a lot more time on GameCube and Wii showing other games like Mario Kart and Paper Mario and other games that seem to run great as well, but it might give you the wrong idea about these platforms as a whole. The one takeaway you should have from all of this is this handheld is just awesome. Next, let's take a look at the Nintendo 3DS with the Citra MMJ build. Ocarina of Time 3D runs fantastic here, minus the occasional compilation stutter that just happens. I think by this point, most people know the issues with 3DS, but with the games that don't use the second screen often, you could have a good time playing them here if you wanted, and you could get over the stutters. Otherwise, for DS and 3DS, I still think a Nintendo 3DS is the best way to play those two systems. Or if you can find a much larger screen where you can see both screens on at the same time. Let's take a quick look at PlayStation 2, and I cherry-picked 2 games here that run well on this device. JRPGs as a whole will run pretty well using Aether SX2, and you could actually play quite a few here at full speed with no concern. Phantom Brave is one example here, another would be Manakemia, and if you wanted something a lot more popular, then Persona 3 Fez would be another option. But out of all of the platforms shown here today, PlayStation 2 is going to be the one that requires the most tweaks, the most patience, and has the worst compatibility out of all of them. If there's one thing that you have as a takeaway from me today, don't buy this handheld for PlayStation 2. Consider whatever you can get to play on PlayStation 2 as a complete and utter bonus, and just consider it as magic. Actually, let's continue that thought into Nintendo Switch. I'm going to be using the same exact games that I used from my Anbernic RG405V review. Indies like Baba Is You and Celeste are going to run just fine. However, the screen is small, the text is small, and indies are about as far as you can go with this device and Nintendo Switch. Are you bored on a random Sunday? Have fun trying to get some other Nintendo Switch games running and see what you can accomplish. This is the most bonus of bonus consoles. Let's wrap some things up here. There's not much else that I can say here. This is a very easy recommendation from me, and I was extremely excited to do this video because this is an awesome device. The device is fantastic, you have really good support from Retroid, they're very communicative, so you can have a good time here and be sure that you're going to get support from the company in case something goes wrong. For competition to this device, I don't know if I could really point to anything else. In my mind, the absolute cheapest retro handheld that you should consider purchasing is the Anbernic RG35XX or the Miu Mini Plus. Those are 2 great gateway devices into this hobby. But the next step up, in my personal opinion, is the Retroid Pocket 2S. And if we want to be completely honest here, this could be the one and only device for you until we start to see a perfect compatibility for GameCube, Wii, and all of those systems. Right now, that would be the Steam Deck, the Asus ROG Ally, or the upcoming AYN Odin 2. But this one device could be your single device for under $100 for a while to go. Definitely keep an eye on any reports for the screen and the heat issues that I mentioned before, in case those start to be a little bit more than what I was thinking in that it's not widespread, but maybe it starts to be as more of these devices get shipped out. Now, as I've been doing, let's talk about if this device is for me specifically, and if I'll be using it from a day-to-day basis, or even just at all. And I don't know if I have an answer yet, and I know that's a cop-out. Right now, this device is competing head-to-head with the Anbernic RG405M for me for my favorite day-to-day pocketable handheld. And if you've followed my channel at all, especially the video that I did within the last 2 weeks, you know that I absolutely love the 405M. And so it's a bit of a shocker for me to like this 2S just as much as I like the 405M. But I think if I didn't have either of these devices, then I would 100% go with the 2S. And I would be extremely happy with that, especially when the 405M costs about 70% more. It's a no-brainer at that point. But ask me in a month what I'm playing more and we might have an answer at that point. Until then, I think we should just be happy with the fact that we're getting so many great devices this year, and it's just a great time to be in this hobby. That's going to be it for this one. Let me know in the comments below. What do you think about this device? Did you purchase one? Do you have one coming? Were you waiting to hear what I thought before you were going to grab one? Just let me know. I'm curious. Please don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow, and hope you all have a good one.